There you go.
Okay, hi everybody. I hope you're enjoying your lunches. I want to just thank Stuart who's sponsoring today's lunch and learn in memory of his mother. Thanks, Stuart. And our learning is in her memory, and we pray that Neshama should have an aliyah, and her memory should be a blessing for you and your whole family. So, for those who are joining us on Zoom, howdy, it's good to see you on Zoom. Those of you who are with us live in person, this is the first time we've done something like this, so we're going to try and make the best of it. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. So first, Shavuos is in just a couple days. Literally, we're just a few days away from Shavuos. If you haven't already made reservations to join us for our program on Shavuot morning, Monday morning, we have classes and barbecue. It's going to be just great. You can do that with Dave in the office. And also, just as a heads up, next Wednesday, there won't be class because it's the day after Shavuos. We'll pick up the following week. So with Shavuos in mind and the holidays just a few days away, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the Torah, because that's what we receive on Shavuos. And so what better place to start than the brachos that we make on the Torah. So let's start in box number 1, Birkot Torah. And those of you on Zoom, I'll read it, don't worry, you're not missing much. So let's start at the very beginning over here. So the bracha that we make on Birkos HaTorah goes as follows. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'anim v'natan lanu et Torato Baruch atah Hashem notein ha'Torah. Blessed are you, Hashem, who chose us, asher bachar banu, who chose us amongst all the people and gave us his Torah, right? And we thank God for that. So anyone bothered by this bracha? What's the problem with this bracha? There's a fundamental issue that you maybe never even thought about. We say that God chose us. Is that how the story goes? Did God choose us? Look in source number 2 here. Look in the Sifrei for a second. Very famous story. The Lord comes to Sinai. When the Lord appeared to give the Torah to the Jewish people, it was not to Israel alone that he appeared, but rather to all the nations. First he goes to the children of Esav and he asks them, will you accept the Torah? And they say, but it says you shall not kill, and we love to kill, right? And he goes to the children of Ammon and Moab and asks them, will you accept the Torah? And they say, well, what's in it? And so God says we shouldn't commit adultery. And they said, oh, well, we can't have that because our Ammon and Moab, their nations came from an adulterous and inappropriate illicit relationship, right? The 2 daughters of Lot conceived via their father. So can't be them. So it goes around and around until eventually we know the end of the story. God offers it to all the nations of the world, but eventually comes back to the Jewish people and says to the Jewish people, would you like the Torah? And the Jewish people say, yeah, we'll take it. Absolutely. We'll take 2, right?
Who are the Jewish people?
What do you mean by that, Ira? Who are they?
You ask the people of Esav, they like to kill, so they obviously, whatever they do. When you say you ask people representatives.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But also, second question is, when Abraham decides that there's only, it's monotheistic, wasn't that the actual indication that would be, did that start the prophecy?
Well, actually, there was never a prophecy promised to Abraham that he would ever receive the Torah. The only prophecies that were made to Abraham was that he would be a great nation and that they would inherit the land, right? That it would be Av Hamon Goyim, and that through him people would be blessed. But there's no mention of the Torah. It never shows up until much later, but it's a really interesting point who this is talking to. This story, I don't think it really happened. I don't think that, God came knocking on the leaders of the children of Esav, the children of Ishmael and Ammon and Moab. I don't think that's what happened. But rather, I think this is indicative of something deeper that's happening here, which is that in the view of the rabbis, God is shopping the Torah around to anybody who would take it. And last, it comes to the Jewish people. It's all based on this pasuk here of Vayom Hashem mis Sinai ba. He came from Sinai. In other words, that he came from shopping around. Comes to the Jewish people and they say, would you like it? And the Jewish people are like, yeah, of course. We'll take it. Nasev and Ishmael. We don't even care what's inside of it. We will take it. But that doesn't sound like God chose the Jewish people. We make a bracha of Asher Bachar Banu, that God chose us and gave us the Torah. God didn't chose us. There's no choice here. He shopped it around. Nobody else wanted it, so we took it. If anything, you can argue that we chose God. God tried getting people to take it. Nobody wanted it. Nobody would choose God. We chose God. We said Nasev and Ishmael. So Asher Bachar Banu, we say that God chose us, but not and gave us the Torah. That's not how it happened. That's question number one. That's not how this story goes at all. How can we say that Hashem chose us? Question number two I want to explore here comes from the next box, which is really on the next page. It's a huge source. And we're just going to hit parts of it. This is Gemaran Shabbos. And the story goes as follows. When Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked, when Moshe ascended on high to receive the Torah, the ministering angel said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe, what is a person born of a woman doing here among us, right? Moshe is standing on Mount Sinai. He goes up to the heavens. He's with God and the angels. And what do the angels do? They say, hey, God, what is this guy doing here? He's a man. He's not an angel. What's he doing here, right? And so God says, well, he came to receive the Torah. And the angel said to him, the Torah is a hidden treasure that was concealed by you for 974 generations before the creation of the world. And you're going to go give it to this guy over here, this Moshe guy? Are you crazy? What is a man that he should receive such a thing? And so God turns to Moshe in the next paragraph and he says, well, Moshe, if you want this Torah, you better go prove that you deserve it. And so he goes in this back and forth debate between Moshe and the angels. The angels are arguing that man should not be worthy of receiving the Torah. Man should not have the Torah at all. And instead, Moshe argues why man is appropriate to have it. Why should we have it? Well, inside the Torah are mitzvos. Can angels do mitzvos? No. We should have it, so we should have a guidebook to know how to do it. And they go back and forth and they argue back and forth. And eventually, if you look in the end, immediately each and every one of the angels, they become an admirer of Moshe and they passed something to him. They all gave him a special gift in this moment because they were so impressed and realized that this man was a special man and that the Torah would in fact be going to the Jewish people. And what did they pass him? So for example, the angel of death gave him something. He gave him the secret sauce to save against plague. And that's exactly what he does. Later on, we know Moshe, there's a plague, he's able to save the Jewish people. But leaving that aside, let me ask a more fundamental question. If question number one was, how can we say that God chose us when he went and shopped around the Torah to all these people? Question number two is, I don't understand. Why can't the angels just share the Torah with Moshe, right? If I want to have a Torah, what do? I go out and I write a Torah scroll. So what's the big deal? Make a copy, give it to Moshe. They're so worried. What is it that they're so worried about that they don't want to give it up to Moshe? Okay, give them a copy of it. What's the big deal, right? And not only that, they're arguing with Moshe about this. What's the big argument? Well, share it. Everybody should have the Torah. Why would the angels protest in such a profound way about this? And then I want to look at just two other things and ask just two other questions which I think are interesting. Let's turn back our page and look in the Gemara and Brachos on the bottom of the page. Look at how the Torah, how God is described here. Amar Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Item, Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. So Rabbi Zera says, some say it was Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. And look what it says. Look to see how the characteristics of God are unlike the characteristics of mankind. How so? Midat basar v'adam. When it comes to human beings, Adam mocher chayfetz l'chaveiro, mocher atzev lokeach sameach. When it comes to a sale, when you're a businessman, how does it work? You sell an object to another person. The seller grieves the loss of his possession, and the buyer rejoices. Right? If you worked, imagine you toiled on a piece of art and you sell that piece of art. So when that person buys it, you feel like you lost something a little bit. Yeah, you're happy, you made some money, but you gave up something that was really important to you. But look at how does Abba Kadosh Baruch Hu Eino Kain, but God himself is not like that. How so? Natan lahem Torah Yisrael. He gave the Torah to Jewish people, v'samach, and he was thrilled to give it to him. He had no buyer's remorse. He was happy just to give it to the Jewish people, no questions. But let me ask a question on this Gemara. How can we say that God just relinquishes the Torah? He just gives, that he sold it to the Jewish people like as it was some sale. He's like, yeah, here, it's yours. I don't want it anymore. Good riddance. I'm just happy for you to have it. Is that the relationship that God has to the Torah? He just wants to sell it to the Jewish people and he just give it to them? And then the last question that I want to ask goes actually to the Haggadah. Back 7 weeks ago in the Haggadah, we sang a song called Dayanim. And in that song, we said, Ilu Hotzianu, if God would have taken us out of Egypt, and what? Keravnu Lifnei Har Sinai, and taken us to Har Sinai, Velo natan lanu et Torah dayenu. God would have taken us to Har Sinai and not given us the Torah dayenu. It would have been enough. Would it have really been enough just to show up to Har Sinai? It's not. No offense to Har Sinai. Har Sinai is just a regular, old-fashioned mountain. So God would have taken us to Har Sinai. It would have been enough to just been at Har Sinai. The whole purpose of coming to Har Sinai was to get the Torah. So what good would it have done to go to Har Sinai? So let's recap our questions here before we delve into some answers. Question one, we said, how could it be that God chose us? Question number two, we talked about this fight between the angels and Moshe about the Torah. Why couldn't they just share the Torah? Why are they so upset? Question three, we asked, how can we describe God as giving up in such a happy way the Torah? The Torah and God are one, as if he just gets rid of it. And the last question I want to ask again is, what's the purpose of coming to Har Sinai if we wouldn't have ever received the Torah in the first place? So how could we have been thankful just for coming to Har Sinai? No, you can say, if God would have given us the Torah, and that would have been the end of the journey, Dayenu. But how can you say Dayenu if we would have just shown up at Har Sinai itself?
Rabbi?
Yes, sir.
Yes, my thought is that part of the answer, if not maybe all of the answer, is that the Torah was given before everything, meaning the Torah was, and the only way to fulfill it is to have the Jewish people. And although we may not have a choice in the matter, as a people, we don't really have choice, but as a person, maybe we do. These are just some thoughts that.
Certainly interesting thoughts. Yeah, interesting thoughts to think about. So I want to share with you, to answer our 4 questions, I'm going to ask another question, which is very, very problematic. What day is Shavuos? What day do we celebrate? Or let me say it differently. What day do the Jewish people on the calendar receive the Torah, according to the majority of opinions? What day? The context for being a rabbi teaching outside, you know what I'm saying? So where the mask helps a little bit. So what day on the calendar did the Jewish people receive the Torah? What day did that happen? I want to take a guess. It's a big machloken in the Gemara, but what day did it happen? I'll tell you, it was the 7th day of Sivan. What day, if that was the 7th day of Sivan, what day do we celebrate Shavuos?
The 8th day.
Not the 8th day. What day would you have thought we celebrate on? The 7th day. We got the Torah on the 7th day. The pyrotechnics, the excitement, all the good stuff happens. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, God says, I am the Lord your God. That all happens on the 7th day of Sivan. We celebrate on the 6th day of Sivan. That's a problem. Why are we celebrating a day early? And not only why are we celebrating a day early, so by the way, it happens to be here in America or in the diaspora, we celebrate 2 days. So we're really doing it right. We're celebrating it a day early and on the day it happened. Those Joes in Israel, they think they're doing better than us, but they really are mistaken. Because
we're really doing right by doing 2 days.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion for some other time. So take a look at this question in box 6 from the Magen Avram. I have a difficulty. How can we say on Shavuos that it is the day of the giving of our Torah? Do we not conclude like Rabbi Yosef in the Gemaran Shabbos that the Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan? After all, we conclude that separation from relationships of man and wife and other laws of Tumah requires 6 half days, as it's written here a day, etc. So, but he goes on to argue, but in our calendar, Shavuos always comes out on the 6th of Sivan. So how do we make sense of this? Why do we celebrate Shavuos? And we say in the Shemona Esrei, Zman Matan Torah. It's the time that we receive the Torah. Well, that's just not true. It's just not true. So to make sense of all this, there's a few approaches to this question. It's a very famous question. So the Drashot Haran expands on this and introduces us to a very famous Gemara in Bav Mitzia, known as the Gemara of Tanur Shal Achnai. So let's take a look here. Tanur Shal Achnai, box number 7. there was a big debate. Let me set the table. There was a big debate between between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages about whether or not this oven was pure tahor or tameh, impure. It was a big debate. Without getting into the details of the debate, it was a debate. And Rabbi Eliezer felt like we could be lenient and felt like we should follow the lenient approach, and in fact said it is tahor, whereas the sages argued and said, no, it should be, in fact, tameh. So they had a big disagreement, and who should the halacha be like when we fight in such a situation? So normally we would follow maybe the majority of people. Well, you can imagine people were not happy about this. So after failing to convince the rabbis logically in the second paragraph, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits. Some say 400 cubits. That's like a really far distance. Imagine if one of these trees, if let's say Ira and I were arguing as to, who the greatest Chicago Bear football player is of all time, and I said, obviously, Walter Payton, and he said, no, of course not. It's obviously, Sig Luckman. So I would say, no, let the tree over there prove it. And the tree in this moment would get up and start walking and say, you see, it's obviously Walter Payton. And so, right, so that's what happened here. He says, let the carob tree prove it. The carob tree gets up and starts walking. The rabbis say to him, listen, respectfully, buddy, we don't get proofs from carob trees. It's nice the carob tree walked around. That's not going to work. So Rabbi Eliezer says to them, if the halacha is like my opinion, the stream will prove it, the water, right? Let the water in the stream, sure enough, it turns backwards. It goes the other direction, right? The rabbis then turn him and say, listen, you can't learn halachic proof from some water and stream. So Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, if the halacha is in accordance to my opinion, let the walls of this base medrash, of the study hall, prove it. And what happens? The walls of the study hall begin to lean inward and begin to fall. In this moment, Rabbi Yeshua scolds the walls. He says, stop that, you walls. If Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, why are you involving yourself in our fight? Meaning walls, stop that. The walls are about to come in, and Rabbi Yeshua gets them to stop, and so they freeze where they're at, and they stop falling in on everybody. And so again, Rabbi Eliezer says, he's exasperated, he's trying to prove, he's shown miracle after miracle. It's obvious the halacha is like him. So he says, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, let the heavens prove it. And a divine voice emerges from the heaven and says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? The halacha is in accordance with his opinion. What are you arguing about? So if you were the rabbis, what would you do if you heard a heavenly voice that said the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer? What would you say? You'd say the halacha must be like Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Yeshua comes, stands on his feet, and he says, it is written, Lo bashamayimi, the Torah is not in heaven. And what is this relevance? What does this mean? That the Torah is not up in heavens for God and the angels to decide. Rather, it's right here for us to decide. And so in this moment, Rabbi Natan encounters Elijah, the prophet, and says to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that time when he saw that we were going to go in our own direction and argue with what God himself said? And so the story goes, Elijah turns to him and says, well, actually, God smiled and said, this is an amazing line, Nitzchuni banai, my children have triumphed over me, my children have triumphed over me. So let's just take a step back here. Here's an example where Rabbi Eliezer is obviously, number one, right in every way. Not only is he right in every way, he's showing all the signs, and God himself creates a heavenly voice to say so, and the rabbis ignore it. Because the Torah is not in the heavens. The Torah is here with us. And God is happy about this. In other words, what I think is happening here is that this story is showing us the immense power that we have. We have this immense power, this immense authority over the Torah. Even if the halacha is one way, the courts in this world have the ability to change the halacha within the paradigm and within the framework of the system. We can adapt halacha to our needs. Think about the difficult time that we've been living in through the coronavirus. So many different halachot that the rabbis and the sages needed to adjust and to adapt because we're living in this difficult time. We have that authority. We have that power. When we say Asher Bachar Banu, that God chose us, what we really mean is that God chose us. In other words, he gave us the authority. He didn't just give us some manuscript. He didn't just give us a Xerox copy of the Torah. He said, take the Torah, have dominion over it, have authority over it. When we accepted the Torah, we got the heart, the soul, and the authority of the Torah, and in a sense, the ability to almost actually overrule God as well. This is what it means when God, Asher Bachar Banu. Let's go back to the conversation of the angels with Moshe. What are they fighting about? They're fighting about who has the authority of the Torah. This is not about who gets the actual Torah scroll. Because if it was about the Torah scroll, then we could just make a Xerox copy. We'll just give the Torah scroll from one person to the next. Moshe gets a copy, the angels get a copy. The angels were arguing, they were saying, God, how can you give up authority? You are God, everything's in the heavens. You're gonna give it to mankind? You're gonna give them this type of power over everything? Think back to the other questions we asked. We talked about Asher Bachar Banu. We asked the question about the angels and Moshe. We talked about Hashem selling the Torah. He literally gave it to us like a businessman. We have the entire authority of the Torah. Let's go back for a moment to the question we asked about Dayenu. If we would have just come to Har Sinai, that would have been enough. Well, let me tell you something amazing. Take a look here at box 19. Box 8, chapter 19 of Shemot. Before we got the Torah, what does God command the Jewish people to do? He tells them what? Vayom Hashem Moshe, Lech Elam, go to the nation, Mikidashtem Hayom Machar. Go spend the next 2 days, today and tomorrow, making yourself holy and wash your clothes. Ve'yu nechonim layom hashishi. Be ready on the third day. The third day, what day was that? The 6th of Sivan. Then he continues. Moshe goes, Vayered Moshe minahar. Moshe leaves and goes to the nation. And he says, Vaykadesh et ha'am v'chavsusi motam. Make yourself pure, wash your clothes. And he tells them, be ready in 3 days from now. Which is not exactly what God says. If you look in Rashi says, Moshe actually added an extra day, right? It means by the end of 3 days, be ready. Don't be ready at the end of 2 days, but be ready at the end of 3 days. That's what he's saying here. In other words, Moshe, when was the Torah supposed to be given? It was supposed to be given on the 6th of Sivan. Why does it move to the 7th of Sivan? Because Moshe added an extra day for the Jewish people to be prepared. Now, if God would have been angry about Moshe adding a day, what would have happened? God would have said, no, you missed your opportunity, right? It's happening today. It's happening on the 6th of Sivan, not the 7th of Sivan. But on the 6th of Sivan, God turned to Moshe and he gives him a gift. He gives him the authority of the Torah in this moment right here. When we talk about receiving the Torah, what do we get on the 7th day of Sivan? We receive the manuscript, we receive the words, received all the laws. But the authority comes on the 6th. When God himself agrees with Moshe Rabbeinu and says, Moshe, you're right. You now have the authority. He gifts it to him on the 6th day. We say in Dayenu, if God would have just taken us to Har Sinai, it would have been enough. If God would have either just given us the manuscript, it would have been enough. If God would have just given us authority of the Torah, it would have been enough. But we say God not only took us to Har Sinai and gave us one of those two, he also took us to Har Sinai and gave us the whole Torah as well the next day. This is what we're celebrating on Shavuos. We're not celebrating just the scroll. We're not celebrating a book that we read. We're celebrating the authority that God gives us. He chose us. Asher Bachar Banu, he gave it to us and gives us the heart, the soul, the authority of the Torah. That is a gift that gives for generations and generations every single day of our life. If I were just to give you a book, you'd read the book once and you'd be done. Maybe you pick it up again, you study it again from time to time, but that would be it. But if I gave you mastery of the skills, it's like teaching a man to fish. I gave you authority over the document itself. I said, it's yours. Go build a world. Go build a life with it. And that's really the ultimate gift. And that, I think, is what we're celebrating on Shavuot. This is why Shavuot happens on the 6th day, not the 7th, because that's the day that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, he has given that authority and God gives in. Just like God was happy in the story of Tanur Shalachnai, just in the same way that God was more than happy that we said, Lo v'shamayim, the answers are not in heaven. We don't follow Rabbi Eliezer, but rather we follow the majority. We follow the authority. God is happy. God was happy to give it to Moshe. He's happy to give it to us. And next Sunday night and Monday, as we celebrate, let's appreciate that great gift that God gives us and use that authority in meaningful ways. Let's work with our sages to create a living, beautiful document that inspires us every single day of our life. So with that, I wish all of you a Chag Sameach. We'll stop right here, and we'll pick up again, not next week, because day after Shavuos, but the following week as well. And those on Zoom land, it's good to see you. Those who join us here, really great to see you in person, and hope to see everyone really soon. Chag Sameach, everyone. Take care.